Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I never thought my quiet, forgotten plot of land would spark a legal battle, but here we are. One day, it was empty. The next, an arrogant HOA president had paved over it without my permission. She thought she could steal my land. She had no idea who she was dealing with, and I was about to prove it. I never imagined that my long-forgotten plot of land would turn into the center of a legal battle. When I bought it 10 years ago, I had grand dreams of building a cozy summer home where I could escape the stress of city life. The small, quiet town seemed like the perfect place, just far enough from the chaos, yet still connected to civilization. But life had other plans. Work got in the way, expenses piled up, and year after year, the construction was postponed. The land remained untouched, a flat piece of property with nothing but grass and a few scattered trees. I paid my property taxes diligently, checking on the lot occasionally, but I never imagined that one day I'd find someone else deciding to use it as if it were theirs. The neighborhood had changed since I first purchased the land. Initially, it was just a growing suburban area, but over the years, a powerful homeowners association, HOA, took control. Their self-proclaimed leader, Karen, had a reputation for being the kind of person who lived for rules. Her rules. I had heard stories about her from other property owners, stories of her issuing fines for the most minor infractions, of her intimidating new residents into complying with absurd regulations. But since I wasn't part of the HOA, I had purchased my land independently, outside of their jurisdiction. I never expected to have to deal with her directly. That all changed the day I decided to visit my land again, just to check on it. The moment I turned the corner onto my street, something felt off. The usual quiet was replaced by the roar of construction equipment, the sharp beeping of a truck in reverse, the distinct smell of hot asphalt in the air. My stomach twisted. This wasn't normal. As I pulled my car to a stop, my worst fears were confirmed. My land was being paved over. A large crew of construction workers were moving quickly, laying down black asphalt across the entire property. Huge industrial rollers were flattening the ground. Cement trucks were parked along the curb, and there were even signs indicating designated parking spots. A parking lot. They were turning my land into a goddamn parking lot. I couldn't process it at first. I had left this property untouched for years, but that didn't change the fact that I still owned it. And yet, here were strangers, working as if they had every right to be there. Fury boiled inside me as I slammed the car door shut and marched toward the construction foreman. He was standing near a blueprint spread across the hood of a pickup truck, chatting casually with a couple of other workers. I barely gave him a chance to register my presence before I spoke. "What the hell is going on here?" My voice cut through the noise of machinery, making several workers turn their heads. The foreman, an older man with a thick mustache and a clipboard in hand, gave me a bored look. "Just a parking lot project," he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I clenched my fist. "On my property? Who authorized this?" At that, the foreman actually laughed. "Your property?" He gave me a skeptical once-over before shaking his head. "Nah, this was all approved by the HOA. Karen Johnson signed off on it herself. If you got a problem, you should take it up with her." Karen. Of course, it was her. I didn't waste another second. My heart pounded as I stormed across the lot, dodging workers and machinery, until I saw her, standing near the edge of the construction zone, arms crossed, wearing that infuriatingly smug expression I had seen in countless HOA horror stories. She was dressed in a crisp white blouse and khaki pants, her signature bob haircut perfectly styled despite the dust from the construction. She was watching the work like a queen overseeing her subjects. "Karen!" I shouted, my anger boiling over. "What the hell do you think you're doing on my land?" She turned slowly, eyes narrowing as she took me in. For a moment, I could see the confusion flicker across her face, but it was quickly replaced by indignation. "Oh," she said, tilting her head slightly. "You must be... What was the name on the old deed? Michael, wasn't it?" Hearing her casually mention my name as if she had been studying my property sent a wave of rage through me. "Yeah, I'm Michael, and I own this land. So why the hell is there an asphalt crew paving over it?" Karen let out a dramatic sigh, shaking her head like she was dealing with a clueless child. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice laced with false patience. This lot has been empty for years. It's been an eyesore just sitting here doing nothing. The community needed more parking, so we decided to put it to good use." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's not how property works. This is private land. You don't just decide to build something on it because you think it's going to good use. Karen's expression hardened. "Well, it's a little late for that now, isn't it?" She gestured toward the half-finished parking lot, the workers still spreading asphalt as we spoke. "The project is nearly done, and I'm afraid there's no stopping it now. You've had plenty of time to do something with this land, and since you didn't, we took the liberty of making it beneficial for everyone. The residents are going to love this new parking space." I was speechless. This woman was acting like she had done me some favor, like she hadn't just illegally seized my land for her own selfish agenda. I took a deep breath, trying to control the rage threatening to consume me. "This isn't over." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. It's already done." She waved a dismissive hand. "Now, if you don't mind, I have a construction project to oversee. Why don't you run along?" I stared at her, my hands shaking with fury. That's when I pulled out my phone, dialed 911, and pressed call. The moment I pressed the call button, Karen's smug expression faltered for just a second. Maybe she hadn't expected me to actually escalate things. Maybe she thought I would just stomp my feet, throw a few angry words her way, and leave in frustration. But that wasn't going to happen. Not today. As I put the phone to my ear and started speaking to the dispatcher, Karen's arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she scoffed. "You're seriously calling the police? Do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound?" "Yeah," I shot back, locking eyes with her. "And I think they'll find what you're doing here even more ridiculous. Let's see how they feel about you illegally developing private property." Karen huffed in exasperation, shaking her head as if I were throwing a childish tantrum. But as I gave the dispatcher my location and explained that unauthorized construction was taking place on my legally owned property, I could see something shift in her demeanor. She had been confident, arrogant even, but now there was a slight tension in her jaw, the smallest twitch of discomfort. She wasn't untouchable, and she knew it. By the time I ended the call, telling the dispatcher that I would wait for officers to arrive, Karen had composed herself again. She offered me a sweet but venomous smile. "Fine, call the police if you want, but let me save you the trouble. We're not doing anything illegal. The HOA has full authority over this area, and I have the documentation to prove it." I narrowed my eyes. "That's funny," I said, "because last time I checked, the county records still list this land under my name, so unless you have some magical document that says otherwise, you're the one trespassing here." She didn't respond to that. Instead, she turned away, pretending to focus on the ongoing construction, as if my presence was no more than a mild inconvenience. Meanwhile, I could hear the sound of a police siren in the distance, growing louder by the second. When the black and white patrol car finally pulled up to the curb, two uniformed officers stepped out, scanning the chaotic scene before them. The lead officer, a tall man with sharp eyes and a calm but authoritative demeanor, approached us. His badge read Officer Reynolds. "All right," Reynolds said, his voice steady. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" Before I could open my mouth, Karen swooped in with her most polite, authoritative voice. "Oh, officers, thank you for coming so quickly. I'm Karen Johnson, president of the Homeowners Association, and we're just finishing up a much-needed community parking project. Unfortunately, this man here seems to have some misunderstandings about how things work in this neighborhood." The way she dismissed me so effortlessly, like I was some lost, confused stranger, sent a fresh wave of rage through me. Reynolds turned to me. "Sir, is that true?" "Not even close," I said, holding up my phone. "My name is Michael Carter, and this is my private property. I have the deed, the tax records, and everything to prove it, and I never gave anyone permission to build on my land." Reynolds frowned slightly and gestured toward the construction site. "And they're doing this without your consent." I let out a bitter laugh. Without my consent? I didn't even know about it until I pulled up and found them asphalting over my land. That got the officer's full attention. He turned back to Karen, who didn't look quite as smug anymore. "Ma'am," Reynolds said, his tone a little sharper now, "do you have any legal claim to this property?" Karen hesitated. It was only for a split second, but I caught it. She had been so sure of herself, so entitled to this space, but now that the law was involved, she was treading carefully. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "the land was abandoned for years. It was becoming an eyesore. We had every reason to believe it was public space, and as the HOA, we took initiative to improve the neighborhood." "Every reason to believe," Reynolds repeated, unimpressed. "That's not how property law works, ma'am." She stiffened. "Well, this is a community matter," she snapped. "I really don't see why the police need to be involved. We can settle this internally." "That's not your call to make," Reynolds said, his voice firm. He turned to the construction workers, who had stopped what they were doing once the police arrived. "All work on this site needs to stop immediately." The foreman, who had been watching from the sidelines, threw up his hands. "Hey, no argument from me. We were just following orders." Reynolds turned back to me. "Mr. Carter, if you want to file a formal complaint, we can open an investigation. This could qualify as trespassing, property damage, and unauthorized development." Karen visibly paled at that. I could see the first signs of real fear creeping into her eyes. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I want to press charges." Karen's mouth fell open. "Wait, you can't be serious. You're really going to make this a legal issue?" I folded my arms. "You paved over my land without permission." "What did you expect?" She opened and closed her mouth, struggling for words, but the damage was done. The officers took down our statements, and Karen was forced to watch in silence as the construction crew packed up their equipment. As the last cement truck rolled away, leaving behind a half-finished illegal parking lot, I could feel Karen's glare burning into me. This was far from over. The fallout from the halted construction spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Word traveled fast, and by the next morning, I started getting curious glances from nearby residents. Some looked concerned, others simply nosy. I didn't care. What mattered was that the project had been shut down, and now Karen was in serious trouble. But I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't the end of it. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat easily. Sure enough, later that afternoon, just as I was making myself a cup of coffee, there was a sharp, almost impatient knock at my front door. I wasn't surprised. I had been expecting this. When I opened the door, there she was, Karen, standing stiffly in her primly pressed blouse and beige blazer, looking every bit the self-important HOA president. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a tall, gray-haired man in a sharp black suit, briefcase in hand. A lawyer. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Wow," I said, unable to keep the smirk from my face. "Didn't think I'd get a house call." Karen's lips thinned. "Michael," she said with strained politeness, "I think we've had a rather unfortunate misunderstanding, and I'd like to propose a solution." I arched an eyebrow. "A solution? You mean after you tried to steal my land?" The lawyer cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Mr. Carter, my name is David Langley. I represent the HOA. I believe there may be a way to resolve this issue amicably without dragging it into the courts." I didn't say anything, but I gestured for them to continue. "This should be good." Karen smiled tightly, clearly trying to suppress her usual condescension. "Here's the deal," she said smoothly. "We recognize that this situation has gotten out of hand. We thought the lot was abandoned, and, well, mistakes were made. But the fact remains that the parking lot is already half completed. Ripping it up now would be an enormous waste of time and resources." I folded my arms, unimpressed. "Sounds like your problem." Karen's jaw clenched slightly, but she forced a bright, fake smile. "We'd like to offer you two options." The lawyer took over. "First," he said, "we're willing to buy the land from you outright. We can make this all go away. Clean and simple." I tilted my head. "And if I don't want to sell," Karen exhaled sharply, like she had been dreading that response, "then we'd be willing to compensate you for any inconvenience." $500,000. I nearly choked. $500,000. I had bought this land for a fraction of that. Even considering property value appreciation, this was way more than it was worth. Something felt off. "That's generous," I said carefully. "Why so much?" Karen flashed a tight-lipped smile. "We just want to avoid a lengthy legal process." Right, because they were terrified of what might come out in court. Then suddenly Karen pulled a stack of papers from her bag and held them out toward me. We just need you to sign a quick agreement saying that you accept the settlement and won't pursue any legal action against me or the HOA. My gut immediately told me something was wrong. Karen's tone turned honey-sweet. It's just a formality, really. A standard release of claims. We need to do this quickly, though, before this gets any bigger than it already has. She flipped to the last page, pointing to the signature line. Just sign here, and we'll wire the money to your account immediately. I reached for the document, but instead of signing, I turned the page over to see exactly what I was dealing with. Karen's expression froze. "Michael, really," she said quickly. "We don't have time for—" I flipped another page, and then another, and then I saw it. Buried in the legal jargon was not a simple settlement agreement. It was a deed transfer. Signing this wouldn't just close the case. It would transfer ownership of my land to the HOA permanently. Karen had been trying to trick me into signing away my property. The moment I realized what I was looking at, a cold wave of anger washed over me. Karen had nearly pulled it off. If I had been just a little less cautious, if I had let my guard down for even a second, I would have signed away my own land, the very property she had tried to steal from me in the first place. I looked up, my grip tightening around the papers. Karen was still smiling, but there was something tense and unnatural about it now, like she knew I had caught on. The lawyer beside her shifted uncomfortably, as if suddenly realizing this wasn't going to go as smoothly as planned. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. Wow, that was slick. Karen's smile wavered. "Michael, dear, I don't know what you think." I held up the document, tapping the section that detailed the ownership transfer. "You think I wouldn't read this? You were going to trick me into selling my land for nothing, weren't you?" Karen's fake composure cracked. "Now, listen here." "No, you listen," I snapped, shoving the paper back at her. "You show up at my house, pretend to offer me a settlement, when really you are setting me up to sign over my property? Are you seriously this desperate?" Karen's face flushed red, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Michael, I was trying to help you." She spat, all pretense of kindness vanishing. "That lot is useless to you. We were giving you a way out, but you're too stubborn to see reason." I let out a bitter laugh. "Right. Helping me by stealing my land out from under me. That's a hell of a way to frame it, Karen." The lawyer, sensing the situation spiraling out of control, raised his hands placatingly. "Mr. Carter, I think we should all take a breath here." "Oh, I'm breathing just fine, David." I gave him a sharp look. "You, on the other hand, might want to think twice about representing someone who just attempted fraud right in front of a witness." His face paled. Karen, now realizing how badly she had miscalculated, took a step forward, her voice lower and more venomous than ever. "Listen to me. You little—" "No, Karen, you listen." I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen to stop the recording that had been running the entire time. Her mouth snapped shut. That's right. I had recorded everything. Karen's face turned ashen the moment she realized what had just happened. The confidence, the smug superiority, the entitlement that had carried her through every interaction so far vanished in an instant. "You recorded this?" she whispered, her voice unsteady. I tilted my phone toward her, letting the small red recording icon glow like a warning light. Every single word. Her lawyer, David, suddenly looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. His professional mask cracked, and I could see the realization dawning on him. This wasn't just some heated property dispute anymore. This was a criminal act documented in crystal clear audio. Karen, however, wasn't done yet. She clenched her fists, her face twisting in frustration. "You wouldn't." "Oh, but I would," I cut her off, "and I will. You just tried to con me into signing over my property under false pretenses. That's called fraud, Karen." The air between us was electric, a tense silence stretching before she finally turned to her lawyer, her voice sharp and panicked. "Do something." David, now looking thoroughly exhausted, just rubbed his forehead. "Karen, there's nothing I can do." Her head snapped back to me, and for the first time, there was genuine fear in her eyes. But I didn't wait for more of her excuses. I walked inside, slammed the door in her face, and by the next morning, my lawyer had already drafted a full legal complaint against both Karen and the HOA. The trial took months to reach court, but when it did, it became a spectacle. Local news picked up the story. HOA president accused of land fraud. And suddenly, Karen wasn't just some power-hungry suburban tyrant anymore. She was a public villain. The case itself was open and shut. My lawyer played the recording in front of the judge and jury, her voice clear and damning as she tried to trick me into signing away my land. Karen sat at the defense table, completely still, her once confident posture now replaced by a rigid, tense silence. When the verdict was read, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Guilty. She was found liable for fraud and ordered to pay $200,000 in damages, a far cry from the $500,000 hush money she had once tried to buy me off with. But that wasn't all. Due to the severity of the fraud attempt and the pattern of misconduct the prosecution uncovered regarding her other HOA abuses, Karen was also sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. I watched as the bailiff approached her, and for the first time, Karen didn't have a single thing to say. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the past few months finally lifted off my shoulders. The sky was clear, the sun was shining, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of relief. Karen, the woman who had tried to steal my land, manipulate me, and even trick me into signing away my own property, was finally facing the consequences of her actions. Justice had been served. The news of her conviction spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The once mighty HOA, which had ruled with fear and intimidation, suddenly found itself leaderless and under scrutiny. Residents who had previously feared Karen's wrath were now speaking out about the fines, threats, and underhanded tactics she had used over the years. Within weeks, the entire board was dissolved, and a new group, one actually interested in the well-being of the community, was elected in its place. As for me, I finally put my land to use. With the settlement money and the satisfaction of knowing that Karen had paid, literally and figuratively, for her actions, I started construction on the summer home I had dreamed of building for years. This time, there were no delays, no excuses, and certainly no HOA to get in my way. By the time it was finished, my once empty lot had transformed into a beautiful retreat. A modern cabin with a wraparound porch, large windows overlooking the peaceful landscape, and enough space to host family and friends whenever I wanted. One summer evening, as I sat on the porch, sipping a cold drink and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I heard the faint sound of laughter in the distance. My family had come to visit, my nieces and nephews running across the yard, enjoying the open space that was rightfully ours. And I couldn't help but smile. Karen had tried to take this from me. She had tried to manipulate, lie, and intimidate her way into control. But in the end, she lost everything: her position, her influence, and even her freedom. And me? I got exactly what I wanted: a home, a victory, and, most importantly, peace.